Good morning, everyone, from British Columbia. We are back at the Quadling Quarry, and that's a close-up here of the Peregrine Falcon. Actually, it's the female just preening herself. So I got a very nice setup this morning. It's just quite marvelous that you can see her there. It's still early in the morning, so we don't have a lot of shimmering in the air, and it's magnificent. It's absolutely magnificent. So I've got two cameras here, and I'm going to let this run a bit so you can enjoy her. And then I will go and show you the nest too, but it's just really marvelous. So what distance is that about, David, what do you
I
think?
think he just measured it. It was about 190 meters.
190 meters. So
Yeah.
about 600 feet, right? It's about we're about 600 feet away, right? So isn't it nice, Mark? Good morning. Yeah, I've got a very nice setup. I'm just going to get my second camera. And I'll let it run whilst I set myself up a little bit better. So I'm just going to see if I can show you the setup actually. 1 second. Let's just do that. Zoom out. And that should work. Let's see if we change the camera. Yeah, that's me anyway. So you can see I got, wait, I need to put the camera up a little bit higher. So that's at the, so I've got my little studio here, completely improvised. 1 second, I'm just going to put the camera a bit higher. So, welcome everyone. That's beautiful. So that should actually work. So I've got a nice setup here, and I've got my big lens right next to me, which you can't see at the moment. That's looking straight up at the quarry. So I'm here in the shade, and it's beautiful. I'm so excited it's working. So I'm just going to switch to the other camera again. And there we go. That's so. I will then set up my camera in a way that you can also see this a bit. Isn't it great? Hi everyone, Cosmic Rose, and so on. I'm just looking. Yeah, please put your comments in. That's very nice. On the road, you love it. That's great. That's wonderful. I'm just going to check and see if I'm also on Facebook. So give me a second now. I have a bit of time to do all this and see if it's actually working. Yes, it is. So hi everyone on Facebook. I can see your comments now. Hi Lori. Hi Deborah. Very nice to have you. So it really seems to be working. Why this is so exciting is, as I explained yesterday, together with Dr. Howard Bailey, this peregrine falcon nest is causing a lot of stir here because it is in a mining site, and it's basically, as far as I understand, it's just gravel, right? And they have been nesting here for quite some time, and so they decided to also nest there this year, and they have a permit here to mine. But as far as I understood, yesterday there was a hold. There was a work order to stop the whole thing. I don't know more, so I can only speculate. But since it's weekend, we have a lot of peace here at the moment, and it's quite beautiful. So you can see her preening, and I will try and move over the camera in a moment over to the nest, and you'll see that he is holding guard there at the moment. So it's what is so beautiful is I've never actually been able to show you peregrine falcons in the wildlife like this. So that's why I'm so excited, because it's much rarer and a lot more difficult to do this than it is with bald eagles, right? Because I mean, bald eagles, no, I'm the eagle man here, and I love showing you eagles, but this is just so unique, right? And it's still early in the morning, so the light is good. I'm going to try and zoom in a bit more now. Oh, you haven't followed much. Yes, I see that. I think you haven't followed much since Spunky. 1 second. I'm just going to check my YouTube channel too, so give me a moment and see if that is working. And it should be, I hope. Let me just take a look. But I've got, yes, it is. That's very nice. So everyone, hi everyone who's watching on YouTube, welcome. I'm just going to put the, hang on, I'm just going to switch. So all that is working. So that's very nice to see you. Wonderful. So everything is working well. That's great. And all my Facebook friends, a very good morning to you. Gail, hello from Northern California. We have falcons nesting on our Ocean Bluff cliffs. Wonderful to watch. Hi, Deborah. Thank you. My pleasure to share. From Chennai. Oh my goodness, that's all the way from in southern India. Very nice to have you, Kalpana and Kathy. Awesome and exciting. Thank you. Just put your comments there and any questions you may have. I've got two experts here, absolute experts. I've got David Hancock, the eagle biologist, and I've also got Dr. Howard Bailey here, and he can really help answer a lot of questions. So I'm going to just let it roll. I'm going to zoom in a bit more on her. Let's see how good I can get.
All this is actually stipulated by the province or by Abbotsford as, you know, they did this 20 years ago, right?
Well, that's quite remarkable at a distance of 600 feet, isn't it? I mean, it's not completely sharp, but it's not bad, right? That's 600 feet away. So we got a beautiful picture. It's a lot better than what I did yesterday. Perfect, isn't it, Linda? It's perfect, and it's a lot better than what I was showing yesterday. From Boise, Idaho. Very nice to have you, Jack. Great, wonderful. So I'm going to just let the camera roll as long as you have patience. I'm going to zoom out a bit so you can see a bit what it looks like. 1 second. That's all good. So there you can see. So she's sitting. What did you call this? It's sort of a dead tree.
Yeah, it's a stump.
It's a stump. Yeah, it's a dead.
Falling off the cliff face there, yes. And those are the roots. Yeah. She's sitting in the root ball.
David, would you like to sit here and comment a little on the nest? Yeah, but if you sit here, I'm going to have my friend David Hancock comment.
Am I on your screen there?
1 second. I'm going to switch over now, and here comes David. Yeah, there you go.
Oh my goodness!
And guess what country it's in? Can you see the chair? Okay, David, go ahead, please, and comment a bit.
Oh well, I mean, this is another day at the Quadling Quarry. This is a wonderful Peregrine Falcon site. We should have had Howard here, but right where we are in southern British Columbia, we're in a kind of transition zone here. Out on the west coast of Vancouver Island, the Queen Charlotte's going all the way down through Washington State, Oregon, and into Southern California, is a peregrine falcon known as the Peel's falcon. And it's a falcon that historically lives on seabird colonies, and it's right. Much more kind of, it's a bit bigger. It's one of the biggest of the peregrine falcons. But on the interior of the continent here, we have another one, an anatom. Not only the Peel's falcon is called Falco Peregrinus peelii. This one up here was called Falco Peregrinus anatom. And then there's other names for other subspecies of the peregrine. Here in the valley, because of this closeness of the west coast falcons, right, and the interior falcons of the continent, there is believed to be a hybridization taking place. And many of the falconers who hunt with peregrine falcons on the west coast got most of their falcons from the Queen Charlotte Islands, because those are the Peel's falcons. They're bigger, and there's a lot of them out there. And so in the early years when I was a young falconer, we used to go up there every year and get 6 or 8 peregrines, Peel's falcons, but we would often lose a falcon. I mean, you're out hunting it, it gets over enthusiastic about its dinner, and it stays with the dinner instead of coming back home with you. And so we falconers often lost their Peel's falcons, and it's thought that maybe some of those ones that learned to be adapted to the lower mainland and southern Vancouver Island, the Peel's falcons that were being hunted by falconers, if they got away and didn't come back to the falconer, they might have integrated and bred with the continental falcons, of which one of them would be the anatom. So it's thought that some of the falcons here in this very part of the valley, and as you get closer to the waterfront, I mean the Vancouver Harbor and so on, where there's other pairs of falcons nesting on the bridges, that some of those are more likely integrated between anatom falcons from the interior and the Peel's falcon from the coast. And which pair this is, nobody really knows. So there's this little conflict that some of the keeners are playing with. Are these birds related to just to the continental falcons, or are they part of the coastal population of Peel's falcon?
That's incredible. David, I'm going to zoom in a bit on the female here. Can you tell us a little bit about what the typical weight and so on of such a bird is?
Well, they're not nearly as big as a lot of people think. I have most of my experience with Peel's falcons, and they're a bit bigger. And we would be very happy if we caught and reared a 34-ounce female, and the 34 ounces is just over is not quite a kilo.
Not quite 2 pounds,
not quite, no, it's 34 ounces is just over 2 pounds.
Okay, sorry.
Not quite a kilo. So this bird here, if it's an anatom group, it's probably only about 30 ounces. So she's not very, very large at all. I mean, by sizes with eagles, which we spend most of our time playing with. But it is the falcon, it is the big one. Her male is probably 6-7 ounces less than she is. So quite a bit smaller.
I know Howard can see the differences, right?
Oh yeah, well, when you get a bird that's even this distinction, a 30-ounce bird and a 25, 23-ounce male, the rate at which they beat their wings, Christian, is quite different. The male will flap his wings faster, and they're kind of a more winnowing flight.
Right.
And so Howard, who's the other biologist here, and who watches this pair intensively, he just knows by a flick of the wing whether it's the male or it's the female, and it is pretty distinctive. She's got a much more deliberate flight, and he's a much more winnowing, flashing flight. He doesn't put the wings through as big a stroke. He's beating them more quickly in a smaller arc.
Well, whilst you talk, I'm going to try and now move the camera to the to the nest itself. So let's see if I can manage that. So go on, please, David.
Well, the bottom line here is peregrines. The bird's name is Falco peregrinus, and peregrinus means traveler. And the peregrine falcon is thought by many to be the widest distributed bird in the entire world. It is all over everywhere. Every continent, they're all over Australia, as well as North and South America, and Asia, Europe. Even a friend of mine, Dr. David Ellis, who, if you go to some of our books, he's done our big Golden Eagle book. He's done our Cranes of the World book. He spent a lot of time on Antarctica, and he's found peregrine scrapes where they used to nest on Antarctica. They're not nesting there at the moment, but they did nest there in another one of these warming periods that the Earth has gone through. So the peregrine falcon is just distributed over so much of the world. Well, more of the world than any other bird. So it's very adaptable. So it makes it an exciting bird. It's incredibly successful at exploiting different types of niches. But again, it's a bird feeder.
So I'm now switching. You can just barely see the head, I think. Can you?
Yes. Yes. We're looking straight in at the nest. And in the very center is the back. Oop, you just flicked a little bit. Yeah, that's great. That's in the almost center. Now a little bit to the right.
I'm going to try and focus it.
Jumped over. Yes, yes. This is I believe the back of the male. He's got his back to us and he's looking the other way, but oh, there he's lifted his head. He's moving
it's
around
a bit because of the image stabilizer. So.
Oh yes, now I see his head is to the. Oh yes, his head is to the left.
Okay.
We're looking down his back, and his head is to the left. He just lifted it up a bit. Your internet connection is good. Oh,
that's good. My internet connection is good. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, we
That's
just got
good.
a signal on the screen. I thought we were being disconnected.
No, it's actually very good. It's working wonderful.
So what is fascinating here. The female on most of these birds of prey sits most of the time, but the male does his job. And in this case, it was apparent this morning, he'd gone off, caught the morning breakfast. Howard was saying, because when he transferred it, she saw him coming, approaching the nest, and she started to scream. And she went out and he passed her the food. It was a small bird. We didn't see what it was he had in his talons. But she grabbed it and took it and went to the stump where you were just watching her. Now, the fascinating thing about that was she didn't spend a lot of time.
There's Howard, by the way. I've got it in the background.
Yeah, she didn't spend a lot of time plucking the food. So because she didn't spend a lot of time plucking it, it meant that the male had already plucked all the feathers off it. And probably he had his breakfast first, and then he brought her the remains. So, and she's had a nice meal, and she's just sitting there in the sun preening now. You were showing her earlier.
Yes, I was. And we can jump back here. Just press 1, and then you're on the main camera. That's it. So you can click between 1 and 2, David. So if you press 1, yeah, that's it. We're there.
That's the nest.
That's a nest, and that's you.
Oh, and that's me. Oh, okay. Well,
so
I don't need to be
between the cameras.
I don't need to be
I'm
on
giving
me.
you everything today, but
yeah, but you don't have her.
The microphone's going through there. Yeah. No, I can't do that.
No, you only have one camera with an 800 lens and a doubler,
right.
And
I could try and focus in, but then we don't see you, right?
Oh, I don't need to be on that camera. My God, I don't need to be here. Anyway, so. Really a fascinating bird because it is so adaptable and it occupies the widest range of any bird in the world. You kind of got to admire. You kind of got to admire.
Thank you.
A peregrine to be so versatile, so adaptable to making a living under such a great variety of circumstances. One of the things that's really fascinating, I got involved in peregrines when I was quite young, and 12 and 13, and I learned to catch them when I was about 14. And so I've had quite a long time catching peregrines, and up on the Queen Charlotte's with Frank Beebe when we were doing all the studies on the ones that are on the colony up there. What always intrigued me about peregrines was this adaptability. The West Coast birds always live, the Peale's falcon that is, always live where there were seabird colonies. Mainly ancient murrelets, but they could live on Cassin's murrelets. Some of them even lived in areas where were slightly bigger. There were rhinoceros auklets. They'll occasionally catch even a murre or a puffin. In fact, one of my holiday trips, going back a few years now, but I used to go and take a holiday, and it turns out that Princess Lines used to pay me to be a guide for a month on the cruise ships, particularly on the Diamond Princess. And one of the great joys we would have when we were crossing the Gulf of Alaska from icy straits up in Alaska, going across to Prince William Sound, out in the open ocean at night, because I usually went in April, all these migrant birds would be flying at night, and they'd be cutting across from the mainland, cutting across to the more western parts of Alaska. And many would get tired, and they'd land on the cruise ship at night. So you wake up in the morning, and you've got hundreds, sometimes thousands of migratory birds on the cruise ship. But we're still 20, 30, 40 miles from shore. Well, out would come one or two peregrines, and they would just sit on the boat until people scared all these little migrant birds off the boat. And then the peregrines would go and nail them because they're out over the open ocean, they're pretty easily caught. And often they would fly back carrying whatever little bird they caught and sit up in the masts of the boat and pluck it. There'd be this great stream of plucking feathers distributing over the boat from the Peregrine preparing his dinner. And on a couple of occasions, we saw them catch puffins out there on the open. And that's puffins got a lot of feathers. So there'd be 20 minutes of feathers showering over the whole boat as the Peregrine plumed his puffin. But that's the neat thing about peregrines. They've adapted to live on so many things. And in the Gulf Islands, which are the islands just straight in front of where we are here at the mouth of the Fraser, there weren't a lot of peregrines in my early experience. We did a lot of looking for them. There may be on the southern Gulf Islands, which are in the American side, there may have been a peregrine nesting there in the 30s and 40s, but not many on what are wonderful big cliffs on the Canadian side until, and the until is kind of interesting. In 1964, we got the starlings moved into southern British Columbia. And starlings are just one of these wonderful little food sources, and they're relatively easily caught. And so when the starlings moved in, and of course at the same time, or a little bit before, we moved into the Fraser Valley, and we moved to train track all the way down the Fraser Valley, bringing the grains from the prairies to the big grain elevators in Vancouver. And they say that every train, every actual train car, between when it leaves the prairies and when it gets to the grain elevators in Vancouver, loses about a ton of grain en route.
A ton?
A ton of grain en route. I mean, even if it's only 500 pounds, there's 100 cars in a train. So, and there's several of these trains a day going through. So there's a lot of grain distributed all along the railway track. Wonderful for pigeons. And of course, that's the other favored food of peregrines. A pigeon is just the perfect size, and it's a huge meal for them. So between us introducing domestic pigeons, because we feed them along every railway track, and because we also managed to bring in and introduce starlings into the area in the about 1964 to 68, all of a sudden we made the area much better for peregrine falcons, just much better. So they did it well way back in the early 60s and 70s, but then we have done the thing we tend to do over most of the world. We tend to pollute things as we occupy it longer and longer, and we disrupt natural habitats. I mean, even bringing in pigeons and starlings is a kind of a disruption. It made a good food source for peregrines, but then we do other things. We blast the cliff. When here we are again. This is a fine peregrine cliff face here, but people are wanting crushed rock, so we're blasting out the rock to make foundational material for roads or buildings or whatever. So we're always changing the dynamics of the environment.
Thank you, David. That was incredible. There's always so much to learn from David. That is absolutely incredible. So we actually, you can see where we're looking at. Maybe you can just explain what we're seeing on the screen there, David, because I'm just pointing up.
Oh, okay. So this is a wider view of the so-called Quadling Quarry Cliffs, and the light parts are where they blasted off cliff faces in order to get the rocks to tumble down, and they're grinding them up just over this little ridge that's in the foreground.
Just describe where the nest actually is.
Okay.
I can try and zoom in a bit more, David.
Okay, I'm just trying to see. The interesting thing about this particular nest ledge, it's very small. It's only halfway up the cliff.
Yes.
It's indicated by hanging down the cliff is a tree that's falling down the slope, and it kind of points down to the nest. So we can focus in on it by seeing that tree trunk hanging down a little gully. We call them chutes.
Right.
It's where the dirt is falling down. In fact, it's damn lucky that just before the nest, the falling debris gets diverted a little bit to the right. Otherwise, it would have fallen right on the sitting peregrine. But it then goes down 10 feet from it.
Switching over to her again.
Yeah.
Or him, sorry.
Oh, him. There he is. Yes. That's a good look at there he is. He's now got his head facing to the right. It's his tail sticking out the back. That's a real close-up.
That's a real close-up.
Yeah, that's a marvelous shot, Christian. Marvelous. He keeps looking up and watching. But there's a lot of little birds flying by. We're very fortunate. There's quite a large number of swallows here. There were cliff swallows. There's violet green swallows. There's even the odd barn swallow going by here. With a bit of an updraft going up this cliff, there's lots of insects coming because just behind us here, 100 feet, is part of the Sumas River and system, and we're half that. This hill that's behind us here, the Fraser River, is over on the other side of that, but beside us on the south side of it is the Sumas River and a new water drainage area called the Vedder Canal. I was telling Christian on the way here this morning, the greatest West Coast bird accumulation known it used to be right here beside us. It was called Sumas Lake, and it had some of the biggest numbers of ducks, geese, swans, and hundreds of thousands of cranes coming in here every year onto this huge, great, shallow lake. But of course, a shallow lake that can be drained can become good farm property. And so in the early 1900s, I think 1910 to 14, they drained Sumas Lake with the Vedder Canal and made it into wonderful farmland. But of course, that was all at the cost of this huge duck, goose, swan, and crane wintering and spring and fall habitat, and particularly wintering. I was telling Kristen also that when they were making the border, defining the borders between Canada and the United States, in this area, it's all the 49th parallel. And there was a man in 1846 to 8, I think it was, a Dr. Lord. He was a veterinarian, and he was in charge of maintaining about 20 horses that took the engineers, the Royal Engineers, and they were putting along that 49th parallel a little cement marker to demarcate the border between Canada and the United States. When he got to the edge of Sumas Lake, he looked out and he describes this incredible plethora of ducks, geese, swans, and cranes. They just filled the sky, blackened the sky. And then a few minutes later, he was inundated by mosquitoes. And he said the mosquitoes were so overwhelming. And he said it so calmly. I mean, in writing, it tends to be, but he said, and the mosquito hordes descended upon us, and the horses panicked and left. And that's the end of that chapter. A year and a half later, he starts his chapter again, a year and a half later, and he says, and now I've had to walk, I took a boat from the Vancouver area down to San Francisco, and I've just now walked another herd of horses back up all the way from California up through Northern California, Oregon, Washington, and he's got another group of horses so they can carry on continuing to survey the border. But I always thought it was an understatement. The swarm that drove all his horses off because there was so many mosquitoes, and a year and a half later he's got another set of horses. It's kind of interesting. Anyway, we've lost that entire area for holding these migrant waterfowl and cranes. They just don't come here anymore because there's no water. It's of course a beautiful British Columbia farmland, but it's not a wildlife area.
Thank you, David. Absolutely wonderful story. Really incredible. So Howard was just saying that he was turning the eggs.
Oh, was he? Just
Yes,
roll them.
and the female in the meantime, you can just see the head there, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And the female in the meantime flew to another tree.
Where?
I don't know.
didn't see her. Do you see her, Howard?
Yeah, well, she's gone in behind. She's on the right of that kind of El Capitan, the wall.
Oh yeah.
Lower right into the kind of the heavy green stuff.
So you really have to have good eyes, and you have to know what. It's very difficult to see this.
Yeah, you don't see her. So she's out of sight for sitting, is she at the moment?
I can't see her. I know where she flew in, but I didn't like it.
Yeah.
She's just around the corner, I think.
I'm surprised she's not watching her husband.
He's got it covered.
Yes, he's doing very well.
Yeah, I'm just going to read out some comments here. Let me see, David. 1 second.
Yeah, do you want to say?
Yeah. I'll So we have a little bit of an ad hoc setup here, and so thanks for all your comments. I'm just going to read very quickly and see what we have here. Are the babies back in the shut? Wait a minute. So there's, if I understand it correctly, if your question is referring here to Peregrine Falcon, they haven't hatched yet. That was in how many days?
Yeah, Peregrine Falcons.
Yeah.
Usually take 46 to 47 days. 36 to 36 to 37 days, right?
So very similar to eagles, almost.
36
very
to
similar.
37 days. So we're still some time for hatching. And then they take from hatching to flying. It's very short. It's only about 45, 46, 47 days. And they're flying. I mean, eagles take 80 days, 83, 84 days to fly.
Well, it's going to be very exciting. I just hope they're going to hatch. I'm not as optimistic, unfortunately, as David is, but I hope I'm completely wrong. And I was explaining that yesterday. It has to do with the shockwave propagation through granite and into the egg. But let's hope I'm wrong. So here is. Let me just read out some comments here. Here. Orimum says that would be amazing to wake up on a bunch of birds on a ship. That was to your earlier comment.
Yeah.
And then there's another comment here. One was living at Banner Gateway in Gilbert, Arizona, saw no nest, but they cut down the trees for employee parking. Oh dear. And even the trees in an outdoor eating area, fascinating to watch. Yeah, thank you and thanks. We got lots of very nice comments that came in, and the internet connection is better now again, so if it drops out occasionally, just bear with us. Here we go again. It seems to be a little bit unstable. That has to do with the signal, which I cannot influence, so just bear with us. It'll go a little bit up and down because we are we are a little bit hidden here, and there's really a big mountain here in the way. So hopefully you'll be able to see it. I'll just zoom out a bit. 1 second. Let's see if we can do that. Yes, that gives you a bit of a better view of the. There we go. I'm zooming out completely now, so you can actually see how hidden this nest is. Howard, do you want to come and sit down?
Sure.
Yeah.
What do I want to do?
Just sit down, and because the microphone's right here, that's why. So I'm going to have Dr. Howard Bailey, who was here yesterday, talk a little bit more about the details here of the nest. So here we go. So Howard, just go ahead and be free and talk like David, okay?
I think that's an impossibility. Talking like David is an impossibility. The man is a wealth of knowledge. So this site has been here probably since the early 2000s, maybe even earlier. This was formerly a forested bluff that has mostly been consumed for aggregate by basically blasting and cutting back into the mountain. During that time, the peregrines have managed to stick around. They basically were protected by a hydro conduit, which came down the center of the bluff there and prevented the quarry owners from dynamiting that section. So what we have now is the quarry is back in operation, and they want to take down this last remnant feature and turn it into money. The trouble is that aggregate is worth somewhat more than grass clippings, but not much more. So it's kind of a shame to lose this piece of property, because there were a couple other species of concern here. The phantom orchid and also the cliff swallows. This is the largest colony of cliff swallows in the lower mainland, and it is slated for destruction. So as David would say, that's beautiful natural BC for you. And
supernatural,
super,
right?
it is super. Yeah, so it's a disappointing situation, but that's what it is. This nest site itself is very important. It's the last nest site in the lower mainland south of the Fraser River, between here and the U.S. border. There used to be probably 7 sites between here, Hope, down to Cultus Lake, and now there's just one. The site is remarkable. Yeah, one. This particular site is remarkable in the sense that it fledges above average numbers of young every year, which is unique in an area that the vacancy rate from historical nesting sites exceeds 50%. This is the highest vacancy rate of any any Canadian population of peregrine falcons. So it's a population in decline. The federal government recognizes that fact, pointing to decline, probably a 60% loss of wetlands in the last 20 years in the Fraser Valley. So you're not seeing the waterfowl abundance. Farming practices are changing, so we're losing a lot of the pigeons. We're also getting more sophisticated in our agricultural techniques, so we don't get the depressions in the field that allow for the the ponds to form that the ducks can congregate in. So you're going to see a lot of shifts here probably in the next 5 to even 10 years. That's going to impact the eagles as well, which depend on abundant food sources, obviously. So this is a remnant feature, sadly.
Howard, I've got a question for you, because I mean, you've dealt a lot with prairie falcons, right?
A fair bit, yeah.
And also in the States. There are a lot of questions, but one question I would like to ask you: how is the protection in some states in the United States as compared to British Columbia? That's one question, as far as the Wildlife Act is concerned. And the other one is, how do your experiences with prairie falcons relate to what's going on here with the peregrine falcon?
Boy, those are great questions.
Okay.
I just have to remember all of them. BC is very, very deficient, and I hate to say that because I moved up here from California. BC is very deficient in terms of its protections relative to the U.S.
Right.
It's kind of a shame. They've probably, the losses in British Columbia, 80% in general of their wildlife over the last 20 years. That includes things like caribou, stuff like that. And it's just it's primarily development. Salmon populations are down across the board. And that's just kind of how they've treated their resources. Is they've had so many, and they've been sort of what's the phrase? They've just been too relaxed about it, and you've lost these populations, and it's impossible to get them back. The prairie falcons are I refer to them as the forgotten falcon. They are kind of off the radar because they tend not to be as obvious as peregrines. Tend to be found more in the deserts, the mountains, arid areas. Very dependent on ground squirrel populations. So if people are poisoning the ground squirrels for whatever reasons, you tend to lose your prairie falcons. They live in more marginal habitats, so as climate change comes in, you start to see a loss of just general productivity in sort of the desert areas. So you have fewer seeds from the vegetation, you end up with fewer rodents, and you end up with fewer prairie falcons. So they're very cool, different kind of bird entirely. They hunt differently, very fearless over rough ground, just pile into anything. It could be desert iguanas, it could be small birds, it could be ground squirrels, but amazing birds, beautiful, beautiful in their own right.
And that's a wonderful answer. So I found this one journal article that was that examined the impact of mining and blasts on prairie falcons, right? And I think the conclusion there was that at a distance of at least 125 meters or larger, they should be fine. Now we have a radius here of 50 meters, isn't that right? So that's so how does I think you were talking about sandstone yesterday, right? Right.
Yeah.
And this is
Yeah.
granite. How does that compare in your opinion?
Well, I think there's issues just with general disturbance from blasting. You have the concussive, the sound of the blast, which is very disturbing. You have the dust plumes. You have the fly rock, which is the rock that can fly for tens to hundreds of yards just from the blast, the force of the blast. But then you also have the waves, the force waves going through the substrate.
Yes.
So this is primarily granitic bedrock, and so it's going to transmit a force wave much more effectively than, say, sandstone. So
Yes.
you would want to have your blast, proportionally further away, and you can estimate that just by the density of the substrate. This part here, the idea of a 50-meter radius is absurd is a word that comes to mind. It's not very often used in scientific terms. Deficient would perhaps be better, but it's way too close. And you have just the general disturbances to the birds, but you can also have the shock waves going through the rocks, which could injure the eggs, the developing eggs. And this is certainly an issue if you think of fish in water, fish eggs in water.
Yeah, I'm just homing in again on the falcon nest. On that's him sitting there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yesterday you made a very interesting comment to me. You said it's not only relevant, the 50 meters. It's also relevant what is in the line of sight or the direct line of sight of the bird. Can you maybe expand a bit on that? Thanks.
Yeah. These are good questions. They're tough questions in the sense that it's complicated. The birds try to pick secluded ledges. They're very concerned about predators, competitors, things that could affect the eggs or the young. So as long as they can shelter back, and they things that they can't see tend not to affect them so much. But if they're in direct line of sight with something, then it's much more obvious, because if you can see it, it can see you. And so when you try to limit disturbances to nests, it's kind of what you want to do, is you want to move the disturbance far enough away that, it's not visually within that zone. So if you're working behind the nest, it's of less concern to the birds because they don't see it. But if you work around the edges and then you come into view, then it's a clear and present danger. Right. And then they don't know what to do with it, but they're constantly on edge. And if they're constantly on edge, then they're not focused, if you will, on taking care of the eggs or the young. So you end up with things like hypothermic events where they're not actually incubating or on top of the eggs.
Talking about hypothermic events, how long, in your opinion, can a falcon leave the nest until it gets critically undercooled or overheated, depending on the environmental circumstances?
Yeah, and that another good question.
Sorry.
No, these are good. It all depends on the temperature differential. So you have issues where the eggs can get too warm. In those cases, the birds will usually shield the nest from the direct sunlight, but you also have to worry about the rock heating. The eggs can get too cold. Generally speaking, too hot is worse because it can be lethal. Colder or cooler just will delay the hatching a bit, as long as you don't get too much duration there.
And how much is too much? I know it's difficult. It depends on the temperature.
Yeah,
I understand.
It's the difference. Probably 4 to 6 hours isn't a problem unless it's really cold. Wet is bad. A lot of peregrines fail because they nest on open cliff faces, and the eggs get wet. Water pools under the eggs, and so it can't get dry.
Right.
And so that's an issue. So the really successful nests have good drainage and shelter from vertical influences like direct rainfall. So some of the sites here on this cliff, they use probably between 4 and 5 sites, depending on which year, are actually like tunnels or shelters in the rock that the bird will get inside, and it'll be protected on all sides except the front. Most of the other faces they use are at an angle, so they drain well. And so when she's on them and protecting the young, just the oil in her feathers will shed the water. And this is, partly why, especially in the early young, their feathers are white, they're downy, they absorb water. You don't want disturbances at that point, because if the young get matted, they will get chilled, and that could cause death within, depending again on the temperature shift, probably potentially even within an hour. So if the bird is disturbed, forced to stay off the nest, you get a rain event and it's chilly out, you could lose the young very quickly. So that's why it's very important to minimize the disturbances around these nesting sites until the young get their feathers in and what we would call hardened up.
And talking about the young, I've seen a marvelous picture. I wish I could show it right now. I should have connected my computer itself to that. But you showed me a very nice picture that you took some time ago. I don't know when, of 4, right? Of 4 young.
Right. It was 2016 probably.
2000, that was beautiful. What do they usually feed on? What type of food do they bring in here?
Well, this is predominantly pigeons. In the winter, they'll feed on ducks and things like that. Sometimes they'll bring in starlings, but a starling to a peregrine is like a morsel, right? It's it's not a meal. And if you have 4 of these young, you got to be bringing in stuff. And so pigeons are probably the bulk of what they're eating. Most peregrines now, it's sad to say in some respects, they're not subsisting on a completely natural diet because there isn't any. You go to California on the coast, you don't see the shorebirds because you don't have the habitat. You don't have the big coastal marshes and things like that. So they're actually feeding on pigeons that are living in hobby farms and stuff like that, just in the coastal hills. The movement of peregrines into the cities is supported by pigeons, right?
Very, very much so. And Howard, yesterday we saw something very interesting. We saw 2 ospreys here, and before that we saw an eagle. Can you comment on that? Because they were very close actually to the peregrine falcons. I was amazed.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Peregrines can be very territorial, both to other peregrines, but also to other predators. And yet they can also be very tolerant. Some of the juveniles from previous breeding seasons actually hang around in the area and will do flybys, visits, hang out, if you will. During the incubation season, most of the time they're more worried about crows and ravens. You don't see real heavy defense mounted against other birds. They tend to recognize ospreys as kind of, large and not really a problem. Turkey vultures fall into that category. Eagles, they tend to be much more aggressive in terms of, loud cackling sounds and actual strikes just to keep them out of the area. And this will intensify once the young have hatched. You typically, when they're incubating, the female won't leave the nest to defend, partly because it's a tell, right? If they see you leave the cliff, now the ravens know where the eggs are. And the ravens are really smart, so they'll force you to leave sometimes so they can figure out where you came from and then go in and crack the egg and have lunch. So one of the spectacular things here is once they do have young is the eagles, follow the river, obviously looking for food as well. And to see the peregrines peel out of the trees or the cliff and, actually pile into an eagle. It's pretty exciting. And after a while, you'll see the eagles will actually do a detour around the nest site. And you see this on the California coast or something. You'll have all the birds riding the wind waves down the cliff, and then they'll get to a peregrine nest, whether they're pelicans or gulls or whatever. They'll actually scoot out about 50 meters over the surf zone and then keep going down the coast, which is it's kind of funny.
It's interesting. If you come to boundary bait, it's something that David Hancock made me aware of, is actually the catch efficiency or the hunting efficiency. David Hancock would have said it's high, but I think he was talking with bald eagles and many birds around 10-15% or even lower. So that means for only every 6th or 7th time when they catch something, it's really successful. It could also be that they are disturbed by an eagle or something else, right? Do you know anything about that, Steve?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like a lot of flights that you'll actually see eagles and peregrines and other raptors make, they're not like super serious. So what they're actually doing, if they have a flock of ducks or a flock of pigeons,
Right.
they're test flights, and so they want to see how close they can get before they spook.
Is that right?
And so you'll see like what you'd call a sortie, but it's not like a threat of engagement. It's just to see what's possible. When they mount a full-on attack, it's very serious and it's a prolonged pursuit.
Right.
And there's still a fair chance that the prey will escape, but I'd say the success rates, if they're committed, are substantially higher. They're probably pushing 50%.
Right.
Partly because they've figured out how close they can get, how close they have to get. So when they really kick it into gear, they've already crossed those thresholds. So now they're into the full pursuit mode. But then you have the issue here in Boundary Bay is once you catch something big that you can't carry, like a duck, the eagles will come by and steal it from you. So, and even a pigeon, it interferes with your flying, and the eagles will come and take it. So that's partly why a lot of the migratory raptors, in the Fraser Valley and Boundary Bay, they'll move through and down into Washington because there's just eagles sitting in trees, and all they do is, it's kind of like stealing fish from osprey. They steal the fish from the raptors, whether they're Prairie Falcons or peregrines that are catching things. But yeah, it's pretty remarkable. And what's interesting is the adults, the full adults, are much better hunters and have learned much more about how to actually do it than the juveniles. So the juveniles, you see a lot of enthusiasm, but not a lot of skill. The adults are far more efficient. I mean, they make it look effortless.
Well, there I've got an interesting question for you, because we know from bald eagles, juveniles, because they're scavengers, they will go onto the dead salmon. How do peregrines solve that, the young ones? How do they actually do this? Because
well, a lot of them die in the first year.
Right.
A lot of them do, or some of them do things like eat crows. For example, I've seen a peregrine eat a crow, kill a crow, eat a crow, and eat every piece of that crow. I mean, when they're hungry, they'll do whatever they need to do. I've seen peregrines catch ground squirrels. You do what you have to do to survive. And the one good thing about when juvenile peregrines are learning to fly and juvenile raptors are learning to fly, there's a bunch of other juvenile birds learning to fly. So your prey species. So you have Fat, Dumb, and Happy being chased by Fat, Dumb, and Happy. And so your chances of success get a lot better. But as everybody matures and gets more experience, you'll see, peregrine will rapidly overhaul some smaller bird, but the smaller bird at the last second will sidestep. And, they're very good at evading predators. And so it's, that's what's always made falconry so interesting is the flight, right? And just the interaction that you actually get to see.
Well, that's incredibly interesting. So actually, probably the peregrine falcon young have to get skilled very quickly, right, to survive.
Well, and what's really fascinating, and if you stay with this, and I would actually encourage Christian to follow this.
I will do that. I will definitely do that. I will absolutely come here. Yeah. I will.
What you will see is you will actually see the adults feeding the young, and then you will see the adults carrying the birds around, so they're forcing the young to chase them before they hand it off to them in the air. So that's a food exchange, which is really cool. And they'll bring birds back that are still alive and set them on the cliff face, so the young have to figure out how they're going to actually catch it and kill it. And if the bird looks like it's going to escape, the adult will scoot down there and bring it back. But it's just that kind of thing that that they learn how to do it, and then the young start flying out on the local mountains and riding the air currents, and now they'll chase everything in sight. They'll chase eagles, they'll chase turkey vultures, and they'll chase other birds. So they're developing their skills. And what starts out as very clumsy, and they'll be chasing each other, which is really critical. But what starts out as clumsy gets really good really fast. And then you have these birds doing just this amazing thing for about 2 weeks after they've fledged, and then they'll actually start catching things on their own. And so you won't see the same bird for maybe 2 or 3 days because he actually found something on his own. But then he'll come back to the cliff and beg for food from mom and dad before he goes out again. So that's kind of a bit more extended period, but it's very cool. And that's really the most interesting time for me of all these things is when you have all the birds in the air doing all the things.
And that begs another question, Howard, is do actually peregrine falcons come back, if they migrate, do they actually come back to their original territory, or what is it there?
Peregrines are what we call high nest fidelity, so they do tend to come back. So you'll see a traditionally successful eyrie will be used for multiple generations. These birds tend to stay here all year. They'll shift and use kind of broader hunting patterns. The juveniles from these birds will be local. There may be periods of time where they take flight and look for something else. One of the issues with the birds in the South Coast is you have a lot of nests which are attended by only one adult. And our biggest problem here is that we're not getting enough young in this region to maintain the historical nest sites. So you have a lot of cliffs, one adult, and they sit there and they'll be out there calling during the early mating seasons and so on, but nobody's showing up, right? Because there is nobody to show up. And maybe you'll be lucky and you'll get a tundra migrant that'll stop in and kind of say, hey, this actually looks pretty good. But for the most part, it's just singles. And that's the biggest problem right now, is that we don't see enough birds being produced naturally in this region. Now you go to the interior region, you see an increase in birds. They don't have the pressure on them from development as much. But in the South Coast region, the population's gone down since 1995. It's probably between 50 and 75%.
That much?
Yeah. And it would be what we call statistically significant.
Yes.
So, you have numbers, historical sites, even in Burrard Inlet, six sites. They're all empty, right? Hope had 2, Cultus Lake had 2. They're all abandoned. You have more breeding peregrines in Vancouver than you actually have in the entire rest of the Lower Mainland, from, the U.S. border up to into Hope, and then up to Lillooet and over to Pemberton. So it's a large area, high vacancy rate, and really not in good shape, which is coming back to why they're destroying this nest. It defies scientific description. It's actually prohibited under the Wild Act, but they received special treatment, or dispensation, as we like to say, which is still an issue, but it's just one of those things that you shake your head at and move on. How's that sound?
Well, it's very sad. Coming to that, the urbanization of the peregrine falcon, if you look at the big cities in New York or so, can you comment a little bit of how they're doing that? I think it's such an interesting subject. So.
Well, I think peregrines have always had they're amazingly tolerant to many things, intolerant to a few things. If they have a food source and they can raise young, they will do their very best to accommodate. So that's all they're asking for, is a chance, if you will. So the cities are great in the sense that they don't have competitors. For the most part, they don't have predators. And for the most part, they have a continuous source of food, pigeons. So there's disadvantages. They don't have good nesting ledges, maybe, or the young in that period of learning how to fly, they don't know anything about glass and running into it and things like that. So those aren't good things. But on the whole, you're seeing pigeons. You do see pigeons, but you're seeing peregrines move into more of the urban settings, because that's literally, if you don't move where there's food and you can survive, then you go extinct. And that's the sad story right now. but peregrines aren't necessarily that smart either. They'll nest on bridges and lose 50% of their young because the young jump off and try to fly and they get wet.
That's right.
I mean, it's crazy stuff, and that's
Right.
one of the issues, say in California on the peregrine iris on the open coast, right? There's nothing beneath them other than water. So, you know, you have to be successful at fledging by staying on the cliff instead of just jumping off, right? That's a bad move. No happy endings. So, you know, these are the kinds of things that you know, it's always a trade-off in terms of nesting sites. It's always a juggle, you know, in terms of trying to maximize success. So in all of this, what you find is you find most of the young being produced by maybe 20 to 25% of the iris in an area.
Right. Wow. Well, thank you so much, Howard. That was an amazing.
Well, thank you, Christian.
That was really amazing what you've contributed here. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
So what we're going to do then is I will cut off the broadcast now. I'll just say goodbye to everyone. Thanks a lot, Howard. That was great.
Thank you.
So that was Dr. Howard Bailey, who is an environmental scientist and absolute expert here on the nest. So thank you for all your comments. I'm just going to see some quick questions here. Who is destroying this nest? I think we've explained that, right? What numbers gone down to? Oh, yeah. Okay, so what is the human interaction there? There are some questions. You know what? I'm going to be here several times. My friend, I nearly said my eagle friends. Now I have to say my peregrine friends. It's a very interesting site. So I promise I'll be here several times. I'll do my best. Come very early with my equipment to follow that, especially once they hatch. Okay, so it's quite an important event here, and yeah, please. Spread this broadcast or share it with others. I really encourage you simply to get the word around to try and protect this nest. That's what it's all about, what we care here for the conservation of wildlife. So in that regard, please share it wherever you want to. You're very free to do that. And I hope it was interesting for you, both David Hancock and Dr. Howard Bailey, with their interesting contributions and highly knowledgeable. And it just gives so much more depth to the wonderful wildlife, as they say, the supernatural Vancouver wildlife that we have here. And I would like to thank also everybody that I know as the Pacific Northwest Kate, who made me aware of this nest. So thanks to her. She's been quite active here already, and she does wonderful broadcasts, by the way. She also got a Patreon channel, so do follow her too. That's Pacific Northwest Kate. And I wish you all the best, my friends. So have a wonderful weekend. And tomorrow I'm going to Kelowna. I'm going to look for more for ospreys. Then I just wanted to say, Monday night, Monday to Tuesday, I'm probably, because my heart is also astronomy, I'm actually an astronomer in charge for a company called iTelescope, and I will also be looking at the total lunar eclipse, but the weather forecast doesn't look so good. So if you're completely crazy and you want to follow a total lunar eclipse, time-wise, it's about 1:30 a.m. Horrible, I couldn't help it. I couldn't plan that one. Till early in the morning, that's the duration of the lunar eclipse during a supermoon that we're going to see. I think it's 26th of May. If you want to bear with me, I will also broadcast that from Kelowna, by the way, where the skies are much clearer. And hopefully that'll work. And if not, I will be looking for an osprey nest and using my equipment there. But it's a lot of uphill there. It's really a lot of uphill and very difficult. I'm trying to organize myself so that I can also show you osprey nests in the wild with the beautiful sounds and everything, and bring nature right to wherever you are and have you enjoy this the wonderful nature that we have around us, right? I can't be a David Attenborough. I'll never be it because he's just so marvelous. But at least I can bring you a little bit of the hearts of nature, and I hope you enjoy it. So on that note, my eagle friends, my peregrine friends, my raptor friends, my astronomy friends, whoever you are, I wish you a wonderful Saturday, another wonderful weekend, and I'll be back very soon. Thank you so much.